I would really like to start by giving maybe 3 remarks. And one is, I think this show, this experience is awesome because it's actually the first time that we have kind of a virtual and analog experience. It's the first time for ESMoA because Cole, you prepared an extraordinary web page and a lot of surrounding stuff about FREESTATE, and it really is almost interactive with all the stuff you put together. So we don't only have the analog experience in the space where people eventually, hopefully, will be able to actually see the original pieces, but at the same time, I feel like the web page is an original piece with all the possibilities around it. And the other thing is, I think the whole show is really also all up the alley of ESMoA and the laboratory thought, because you guys, you give so many thoughts in the show. And I feel like we put together kind of in the show the tools and the pieces that can have a life on its own and basically wait to get out of this the setting and find a life on their own. And I love it also that you both give a great way of looking in 2 dimensions, 2 directions, and root into each other, like the past and the future. But we maybe get back to it when we talk about it a little bit more. But I love all those 3 aspects, and I think it's wonderful. And although I have seen the whole place only like from basically a virtual point of view, I think it's awesome, and thank you very much for it. So when we go into the show, maybe Álvaro, since you are in the first space, maybe you give us a little bit of an idea and tell us about the concept and what you were thinking about when you created this work.
Sure. So a lot of my work has to do with historical and contemporary forms of displacement. And the research has really gotten me to think about the first wave of displacement in what we now call California, which would be colonization and indigenous erasure. So I thought that for a show that posited this thoroughly radical idea of creating a new republic based on these utopian ideals, I thought it would be really useful to get visitors to think about the past before we move into the future. That means if we were to imagine this independent California republic that writes a new constitution and tries to amend these past wrongdoings, then I wanted to plant some seeds, these questions into the viewers to think about our relationship to the settler colonial project, which impacted not only our relationship to the land and the natural environment, but to one another and to various racialized others. So I saw it as an opportunity to use my interest in history to posit these questions, to get people thinking about their relationship to each other, to the land, and to history.
And the aspect of land, I mean, the physical land, what kind of thoughts have you had on that? Because I could see there like the acorn and like elements, like natural elements in your work, and also the corn fragments, let's say. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. Well, I think in my research, when I first started doing work as a printmaker, I was really interested in this question of gentrification. As somebody who moved to Los Angeles in 2008, I really wanted to understand my place in the process of gentrification. As somebody who's not from here and who is in a way implicated in these processes of gentrifying neighborhoods. And in the research, I realized that what is at stake for me, if I go to the heart of the matter, is how it is that land has been commodified and turned into private property. You know, that's a notion that really existed only since the arrival of the Spanish. Prior to that, indigenous communities lived in reciprocal relationships to the land. So these allusions to the natural environment are really trying to get us to think about how it is that we treat land as a commodity for profit. And from that, there emerges all this panoply of social issues, whether we call it gentrification, redlining, unhoused populations living on the street. It really goes down to our relationship to soil, to the land, and how it has become something that is traded for profit, and most of it can be controlled by few people. And so that is where the heart of my interest lies, in terms of thinking about the natural environment. But if you zoom out a little bit, it's not just about our relationship to land as a commodity, but it becomes also about our relationship to trees, to animals, to each other. It becomes part of this complicated colonial history that in California dates back to 1769.
Wonderful. I mean, there's a lot to take in. So, I mean, Cole, when you look at your original concept and how it all worked out in the end, I mean, can you give us a little bit of a background about the ideas behind FREESTATE, and how you felt during basically the exploration of producing the whole show?
Sure. Well, I mean, about 12 years ago, I was frustrated with some of the political climate in America. And I wrote this book about California having a coup d'etat. The book was horrible. I threw it in a drawer and never looked at it again. But then about 2 years ago, Bernard, you and I chatted and kind of rejuvenated this theory in the context of today's troubles. So that grew and grew into, okay, what could a more enlightened state look like through the guise of California secession? Using California as this platform or megaphone for just a much bigger reevaluation of a nation state.
I mean, specifically, I mean, you really created something which almost looks like a whole factory of ideas of things. Maybe when you kind of work in your mind through the spaces, maybe we can start with a front room and with a specific pieces there, the symbol, or let's the sign of the new state. I mean, maybe you give us a little bit of the idea. Okay, you come into the first factory room. How did you perceive that, or how do you imagine? Did you imagine that?
Sure. So, there's a lot of content and visual dynamics that kind of run across all of these spaces and across the web and across my mind. So that idea was within ESMoA that it kind of operates in reverse chronology in a way. And in the first room, you think maybe you're in a high-end clothing store, maybe you're in a graphic design office, maybe it's a canvassing office, but clearly something's happening. It feels like the Free Republic is an actual thing, and you just don't know what that thing is yet. So everything's pretty conscious and structured with that in mind. The wood is just raw plywood, which I like because it brings thoughts of death and rebirth, the smell of it, the fact that a tree was killed, to make it, and the fact that we use it to build any kind of structure. I like that, and I like the visual of it in terms of just reiterating a lot of what Álvaro was saying about our relationship with the trees and the environment in general. And then within it, you see this explosion of propaganda, for lack of a better word, whether it be the California New State Seal, the Free Republic text, which uses a font called Optician Sans, which is the font that eye doctors use to see if you have vision, to the little pins and hats, and then the entire clothing line, which, turned into pretty much a whole streetwear line in the end, all pushing forward the ideas of the show. And then on the walls, you see the planning. So this is where it feels more like an office about to decide, okay, here are the printer's proofs of the budget. This is ready, ready to go, ready to be distributed. Here's how the clothing looks. Here's how the website looks. So it feels like that last sort of visual moment before everything launches into the world.
I see you're wearing also the shirt you are basically having in the front room.
And by the way, Cole, I want to say you did a great job on the t-shirts. I've been wearing mine. I love how you have the actual label. It looks so professional, and you chose
Thanks.
a really good cotton blend. It's a comfortable shirt to wear. So kudos.
Thank you. It was actually a big thing for me. I wanted a heavy shirt that was still soft, and it took a lot to find this one, especially in the virus time, because you couldn't go to, you know, all the different places to test them. So yeah, I'm glad you like it.
Yeah, no, nice work, Cole. Seriously.
There are parts where I feel like, okay, you act like a conceptual artist, and then it becomes more lawyerly kind of, and then it goes more into the politician role, and then it goes back to more like a designer. What was the most enjoyable part of it? Or was there any part where you feel like, okay, that's really something what I really want to point out also for the audience?
The most enjoyable part is frankly seeing it all come to fruition. I mean, in the whole exhibition as like a whole, but also the finishing bits of it. So seeing the Constitution in a format where I'm comfortable with it going to print, or with the clothes, figuring out how to make them myself, because I hadn't ever made clothes myself before, and like finishing a selection of them felt like quite an accomplishment. So there are all of these bits that took months individually to make, and I just enjoy the point where they're done and I think they're decently made. I work on a bunch of different levels at the same time and a bunch of different subject matters, and I feel like this jack of all trades, master of none, but that's okay, because no one can really be a master of any of these subject matters. And this is just a starting point, the acorn or the seed to push discussion forward. Like, I can see the Constitution having 10 different drafts based on other people's commentary and revisions and suggestions. And that's cool. Like, I like that sort of dynamic of time and knowledge developing together. I mean, the original US Constitution didn't have that luxury, I guess, which is, I've never thought of before right now, but you know, this could be a 10-year project for a bunch of the elements of it. I mean, the clothing or the Constitution or certain social activist bits of it.
I mean, I totally love it that it really, for me, it really like emphasizes the role art could have in the future a little bit more. I mean, you may know, or we may talked about it, the next Documenta in Kassel in Germany, which is one of the largest art shows in the world. They especially choose a new group of curators, which is an artist group from Indonesia, which is like totally focused on social worker projects and basically interventions. And it also goes back to, let's say, boys and dimensions in art history, where artists like boys became almost politicians because they wanted to create the Green Party and stuff like that. So this is, I see totally the parallel. Have you had this also in mind when you were working on pieces? Or let me put it this way: what are the pieces where you hope a little bit like they will have an impact, or is there anything where you would say, well, this is really something I really would love to see somewhere else, or would something come out of it?
Sure. Well, Joseph Beuys, on one hand, like really inspired the show in a couple of ways, whether it be his helping found the Green Party in Germany and a direct political activism tied to such an important artist, or just the manner that he would put together exhibitions. So format-wise, he had the bravery to mix between found objects and painting and drawing and writings and all these things all at once, and that inspired the whole structure of the show itself. And then seeing the specific pieces move and grow and influence people. I mean, really the Constitution would be the big one, because that covers every other component of the show. And when people ask, oh, you know, what about police reform? What about immigration? What about the environment and sustainability? All of those things are in the Constitution. they don't necessarily state, you know, this deals with this current event, but the legal language in it would prevent some horrible things from happening and push some positive things forward. So if that can influence, you know, amending the US Constitution in one subject matter, or just teaching another generation how the Constitution is this fluid thing that can dynamically adjust to our social dynamics, that would be amazing. So that would be the one, you know, key focus. And all the propaganda stuff is all just pushing towards that.
I remember when we talked about the whole subject of constitution, I also mentioned to you that in Germany, in a way, there was like in '89 when the wall came down, this kind of half a year of anarchy in East Germany, and everything seemed to be possible and totally new things were happening because nobody was envisioning this. Sort of, for some people it was a big catastrophe, for other people it was a super liberating act. And when we look back at that time, for example, in Germany, sometimes, I mean, a lot of people in the rest of the world don't know it, but Angela Merkel, for example, and also our former president Gauss, they were kind of spiritual people. They came from a priest household, or other party members of the original party that won the election in East Germany. They were artists. And right now we are in the middle of a crazy situation with lockdown and COVID-19, which is a little bit also a groundbreaking event. I mean, do you think your work in this specific moment has a special, I don't know, has a special meaning there?
Yes, I think in the time of coronavirus, there's another layer to the dynamics of the show. The show was already, you know, conceived and being built before this happened. So it's really, like everything else, kind of pulling the specific ideas out, whether for America in general, like the fact that we don't have universal health care, that's a huge issue in terms of the virus, and that's provided for in the budget and the readjustment of California's financials. Personally, the coronavirus, I mean, sent me into a lockdown that allowed me to focus in and tighten up these concepts much more than I would have been able to otherwise. So ironically, that was a little bit helpful. And then the coronavirus has also highlighted this huge social split of America, this ongoing dynamic of a certain percentage of the population being unwilling to take facts or science or literature or the arts into their minds whatsoever. So, you know, like masks, for instance, the idea that that is a political thing in America is perplexing to me. And we touch on that throughout this, because my whole thing is about rationality and actual information, which I think we need more of right now.
Yeah. What I think is interesting too, if I may interject, is, you know, there's so much talk right now about how the coronavirus has sort of exposed the failings of the state. And so many activists has called to said, let's not return to normal. Let's learn from how it is that these social fissures are revealing so many structural problems we have in the country, whether it's the premature death of Black people, to police violence, to the failings of the Medicare, of medical coverage. You know, I think your show, your concept, Cole, really sort of happens in a moment where so many of us are imagining how to not reset to the normal and how to imagine this new set of possibilities, perhaps congruent with what you're saying, Bernard, about the moment the wall came down in East Berlin, right? There's going to be, I think that the coronavirus is going to mark a point in history of a before and an after. So I think that there's something really powerful in that.
Yeah, I think at times you need to almost collapse something in order to rebuild it, and it's an unintentional collapse currently. But yeah, I don't think, I mean, these police reforms that have been needed forever, and yet with the virus, for some reason, it's motivated people to put that in front of our eyes and fight for it a little bit harder than in a normal year. And maybe that's because people aren't going to work. I mean, I don't really know, but yeah, I really love what Álvaro said. I think it's like a perfect way to look at it.
So how do you perceive, I mean, you both put so many seeds virtually in the ground. How would you perceive your work to live on after the show? I mean, are there any maybe dreams in the whole of California dreaming that might go on where you feel like, okay, that would be something you would like to see in the future, or would like to encourage the audience to do?
Well, I know for me personally, you know, I have really been, as somebody who has identified as Chicanx, you know, a non-gender specific form of Chicanismo, you know, there's this really deep history of trying to understand indigenous practices. And I think that in Chicano discourses, there's often been this notion of Aztlán as this, you know, this land that was taken away from us by the Yankees, right? That used to be Mexico. But I think for me, it's a reminder that prior to Mexico, Mexico is a colonial construct, is a product of colonial powers. You know, prior to this notion of Aztlán, you know, this was indigenous territory. So for me, moving forward, I know I'm really compelled by the opportunity to learn from indigenous activists and indigenous artists. And for me, you know, I'm very careful not to speak for indigenous populations, but I'm trying to speak with indigenous populations. So I know for me, you know, the acorns and this whole concept of the seed is about really thinking about implanting doubts. You know, I think that for me, I'm not so presumptuous to assume that I have all the answers to these questions. I think they're complicated, and just like Cole is alluding to, you know, this is the beginning step, right? Like this is a draft of what could happen. So moving forward, you know, I would want to plant doubts. You know, let's have a little more doubt in our certainty about how history has unfolded and how to move forward. And I think that, you know, given also what Cole said about this attack on truth, you know, to really, to take a moment and sit and recognize that we live in, for the last at least decade and a half, there's this erosion of truth and veracity. And there's, you know, grave social implications for that. And so, you know, for me, that's why I ask questions. I don't have the answers, but I want them to plant a little bit of doubt so that we can be a little more critical and think about our place in the world.
Same. No, I mean, we've talked, Álvaro and I have talked about this today, but I think the big takeaway is that it should live on in people's questioning and in people's thinking, and losing this fear of change or fear of analysis. Like we never, I mean, why isn't there a constitutional amendment protecting the environment? I mean, you know, like each subject matter has those whys, and then that leads you down all these different paths. And I think that's how it can live on indefinitely, as hopefully we grow towards this more fair, enlightened, sustainable place. And any of the work can be used for that.
I mean, I can see a lot of, I mean, looking at your web page, I think there are a lot of possibilities to download things and to basically create pieces that get a life on their own. Is there anything, like, for example, what you would like to tell us? I mean, as a sort of final statement to the audience.
I would love for the audience to experience this physically because of the way the rooms shift and the way it's easier to breathe in one room, really, and the way it's maybe more conducive to learning in another room and more conducive to activation in another room. So I think it would be great on that to see it in person, but in general, take the website, mainly the Constitution explained and the budget. The budget's very easy to read. The Constitution, when it's explained, is a little bit easier than not explained, and see where that takes you. Maybe that means, you know, activating a certain issue via protest or communication or social media and distribution of the knowledge that you take from it, or in a bigger perspective, actual infrastructural change in the long run. So I think if people have open minds and some bit of curiosity, you know, they can get a lot from this, whether it's today or 10 years from now in the space or on the web. And the idea behind the Free Republic is to continue programming and education and activation for as long as we can manage.
Yeah, I mean, I think as a historian, you know, the world we live in is not a given. It's not a natural fact. You know, it's a historical process. It's historically contingent, which means it is the result of historical processes and social action. And so rather than feeling defeated by this political moment, rather than feeling that everything is just going to stay the way it is, you know, really to remind people that the world exists because active decisions are made to create it in the way that it is. And we have a certain level of agency. And I think that one of the fallacies of American politics is to think that things end at the ballot box. You know, I think the ballot box is simply one place in which political struggle occurs, and the rest of it occurs in the quotidian lives. You know, so, you know, I would hope that there's a sense of hope that things can be different. They don't have to be this way.
Looking at the whole thing today, I mean, like, we didn't know in the beginning how the entrance room would look like. We didn't know how it would all fit together, like the two-dimensional works. And also the beauty of basically having, like, in the end, four rooms. I think it works out very well, I have to say. I mean, even only by looking at it from in a little square angle, it looks amazing. And I really love the aesthetics, I have to say. I think the aesthetics are a strong part in the show. I mean, like it is, for me, it's not like a surface, like letting it look beautiful. I think there's a beauty from inside, and you can really feel it, even over this technical tool, you know. So congratulations, it's really cool. Yeah, thank you so much, guys. I mean, fascinating thoughts, and I have to say there's so much deepness in the show and a lot of radical ideas, and yeah, a lot of seriousness, and at the same time a very, very incredible way of beauty, I have to say. I mean, the whole setup and the whole way it worked out, I think is really encouraging. And to me, this kind of beauty is a sign of hope in many ways. So thank you very much for this. And I hope I will see it when I will be able to enter the United States in person. Thank you so much.
Thank you.